Hey, this is Brock Lemires, and in this video, I'm going to explain how to pass arrays into functions as part of the parameter list. Okay, so here's kind of the key to arrays. You can certainly pass an array in to a function as an argument, and the way that you have to do it is you have to tell the function that you're designing that it's an array coming in. And so one way to do it is to actually just put the square brackets in the parameter list of the function, and then you can access it just like normal. When you do this, you really are passing in the starting address of the array. So you're not giving it any information about how big the array is. Okay. So it's not like you copy the entire array into a temporary thing and then say, here's a 1,000 element array. You're basically just saying, look, here's the start of this array. And I'm not going to tell you I'm not going to automatically tell you how big it is. As a result of that, you should also pass in another parameter, which is going to be the size of the array. Okay, so usually best coding practices are passing the start of the array and then also the size. And then when you think about it, what does it return? You can't really return an array because you can only return one thing. And so arrays are a little bit interesting in terms of like if you wanted to modify the values of an array in a function, you have to do it a little bit differently. And that's what we do with what we call pointers, which is another lesson that we'll get to. Okay, so let's code along and let's just throw a simple array into a function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change into my mod08 code along. I'm already logged into the server, and let's go ahead and check out what's in here. We have all of our prior code we're doing. Let's go ahead and create a new C program file called arrayfuncs.c. Okay, let me pull this over here so you can see, and we're off and running. Okay, so I'm in Vim. I'm going to hit I to go into insert mode. Let's do our comment header. So passing arrays into functions is what we're doing. And let's begin. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go I'm going to go pound include, and then I'll bring in the standard io.h library. And that's because we're going to use printf. And now let's do functions. Okay, so here's where we're going to put a little function here. So function to print 1D array. So what we'll do is we'll create a function where it gets passed an array of integers. It knows they're integers. And what it'll do is it'll just print it, okay? So this will not have a return in this example since we're focusing on passing something in. So we'll have a return argument of void, meaning that this function will not print or not return anything. And then let's call it print array is gonna be the name of our function. And now here we have our parameter list. So we're gonna have an array called A, and I denote that it's A by doing the square brackets. And then before that, I have to tell the function what's the type of A. When I put int right here before it, that means A holds integers. Okay, so it's basically passing the first address of the first location in the array A, and that will allow this function to start accessing it. Okay, then we're going to pass in another one called size. And so it's up to us to actually pass in not only the name of the array, but also how big it is. Okay, so now let's come down here and let's go open curly close curly. And what we're going to do is let's go ahead and create a loop variable I, and we will use a for loop to access all the elements in the array. This time, let's print it like this though. Let's try to get the output to actually print just like we do when we initialize an array with the curly brackets. So watch how I'm going to do this. I'm going to print your array equals, and then I'll do curly bracket and then a space. And then the for loop will print all of these in one line, and we'll do that by not putting a line return each time we print it. Okay. So I'm going to print f right now, and I'm going to say your array equals open curly space, and then I'm not going to put a return. Okay. All right. So that's that little fella. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my for loop, and I'm going to say for. Now I'm going to say I is equal to 0, and then I is less than size. This Boolean condition uses the size parameter that was passed in from the calling function to know how many times to iterate through this array. And then each time through, I'll go ahead and increment that, and then we'll close that little fella. Then we'll come over here, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm simply going to go print f, and then I'm going to go %d format specifier, meaning I'm going to print an integer as in decimal format, and then I'm just going to do space, and then I will end it, and then I'll just basically say print array a at index I, and then be done. Now you think about the way we're printing, this doesn't have a line return in it. So each time it's just going to print it with a space, then the next one print it with a space, next one print it with a space, next one print it with a space. So that's how you get this down here. You're going to go -2 space, 1 space, 5 space, 7 space, 6 space. Then the last thing to do is after we've iterated through the array is we need to put the closing curly brackets, but that actually happens outside of the for loop. So then all I need to do is go curly bracket, and then we'll throw the line return here just so that it's easy to see when we run it. Okay. All right. So that's really my function. So now I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, well, now what? Well, let's test it. So let's go ahead and do our main function. And now that we have multiple functions in here, you kind of like want to start main function. You kind of want to comment this up so you can see the thing. All right, so here we go. Now here's our main function. Let's do the normal shell. Notice I didn't return anything here, and that's because I did void. If you wanted to, you could just do this, return, and that just elegantly ends the function. But since you're not returning anything, you don't need to do that, but it's you know, good coding practices. Okay, here's our main function. Int main void open curly, come down here, return 0, and then close curly. All right, I'm going to pull this all the way down here so that we can kind of see our function as we do this. So now all I'm really going to do here is I need to create an array to pass in. And let's do this one that we had last time. So we'll go int, and it doesn't have to be called a. In fact, I'm going to call it something different just because I called a up here in the parameter. I'm going to call it e. So I'm going to say e, and I'm going to give it that. And then I'm going to initialize it to, using curly brackets, and I'll initialize it to -2, 1, 5, 6, 7, curly, done. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I need to know the size of this thing. Okay. And so what I can do is I can do it a couple different ways. I know that it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I could just pass a hard-coded 5 in. And let's do that first. Let's do that first. I know I could also calculate it, but let's just do this. I did that. And now what I'm going to do is this. I'm just going to call the function. So I'm just going to do this. I'm going to say print array, pass in e, size of 5, done. That's my entire program. Okay, that's my entire program. So I'm going to sit here and let's test this and make sure it works, and then we'll play around with what else can happen here. So I'm down here in a second shell. I'm in my home directory, so let me change over to my mod 08 code along. I'm going to take a look. Here's our where are we at? Array funcs. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to clear this up so you can see it. GCC array funcs, and oh boy. .c, I did that with a tab autocomplete. I do -o to redirect the output into a binary file called array funcs, and then I'm gonna say go. Go ahead and let's do it one more time with warnings all on. Make sure we didn't leave out any variables. Okay, and now let's run this thing. So I take a look at what's in there. Now here's my executable. Let me clear that up. I'm going to Sunny Holland // meaning look in the directory that I'm in right now for the executable, not in the Linux path. And I say array funcs. Your array is that. Look at that. It did it. Life is good. Now, the only other thing that might be kind of cool is if you didn't want to like hard code, the size, you could come in here and be like, all right, leave that. And then I'll do another int called e size. And I'd say, okay, that's going to be size of e, and then divided by size of e element 0. And you're like, what in the world is that? So let me make sure that will run. So let me compile that, make sure that was clear. Warning e size, never used it, not a big deal. So when I do that, let me print this. So I'm going to go print, just to make sure this works, print f size of e is, and then format specifier %d, meaning print an integer in decimal format. And then I will say return, and then I'll say print e size there. And that'll make sure that it works. Now let's come down here, clear it up. Let's go ahead and GCC our buddy. Let's go ahead and run our buddy. And look at that. Size of E is 5. So this was that trick that we used to find the number of elements in an array. We say, what's the size of E? And it will tell you the number of bytes in the array. So since each of these is an integer, this is 4 bytes, 4 bytes, 4 bytes, 4 bytes, 4 bytes. So it's actually 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. And then you divide it by the size of one of the elements, which is an integer. So it'll return 4 bytes. So this is actually 20 divided by 4. That's how you get 5. The reason you would do that is just so that you don't pass in a hard-coded value for the size of the array, which is kind of cheesy. So I go ahead and fire that buddy up. It's like compile and then run, and look at this. It's so awesome. That's it. All right, let me warn you about a couple things before I end this. Number one, the way that we're doing this right now, you typically don't alter, you don't return the array. Okay, so you can't return an array out of a function because a function only returns one value. So you can't return like this list of values. So if you're going to try to alter an array inside of a function, you have to do it by like altering the inputs. So it's a little bit tricky. So don't do that yet. We're going to do that once we get to pointers, and hopefully it'll make sense then. All right, that is it. That is passing arrays into functions. Nice work.